Hello and welcome to the morning sports briefing here on the 8th of May, coming to you via New Zealand Sports Radio at 8 a.m. every single morning, 7 days a week, not just weekdays. It's your best way to start the day up to date on all the important sports news. And today we have NRL columnist slams anti-vaxxers, rugby players are the latest to break isolation rules. Plus, we also have more news on the return of Super Rugby. Formula One might not happen, and we have a return date for football. And cricketers also say they will go into isolation to make sure the season happens. And to kick us off, we're going to start off with the league news today and that vax issue. Thank you, Stephen, for bringing us up to date on that.
Yes, good morning, Paul, and good everybody tuning into New Zealand Sports Radio this morning. First cab off the wreck. Here we go. In Rugby League, veteran NRL columnist Andrew Webster has slammed the anti-vaxxers for turning the competition's return to training into a circus. The NRL yesterday afternoon, announced it will allow players refusing to take the flu shot to play. Canberra players Josh Papali, Sia Soliola and Joe Tapine were the latest to refuse a flu shot, which has been demanded by the NRL as one of its measures to recommence the season. In an escalation of yesterday's anti-vax saga, the Raiders players joined Gold Coast's Bryce Cartwright in taking a stand against any policy that would make it compulsory to receive a vaccination. Prime Minister Scott Morrison had encouraged the NRL to adopt a no-jab, no-play policy following Cartwright's position. The NRL, going against the increasingly strong rhetoric from the federal government, has chosen to back the players' freedom of choice. Speaking on 2GB's Wide World of Sports Radio, Webster said 97% of the competition was in favour of accepting a vaccination. Webster said the NRL had agreed to alter minor details on the waivers every player and team member had to sign, which would allow anti-vaxxers to play when the season relaunches on May 28th. In other league news this morning, West Tigers veteran Benji Marshall has warned constant scrutiny on NRL players coupled with the high-stakes nature of the sport can push people to the edge. Marshall delivered his comments on Thursday amid the controversy about the blinding spotlight that has been placed on Rabbitoh star Latrell Mitchell. South Sydney captain Adam Reynolds on Wednesday said he'd hate to see us lose Latrell to the game to all this immediate tension pressure. Rabbitoh's coach Wayne Bennett branded some coverage of Mitchell appalling and told Triple M the prospect of the 22-year-old international walking away from the NRL is not going to happen on my watch. Marshall, who can emphasise in some aspects, given he also experienced expectation that comes with reaching the summit of the game at a young age, said state of mind of players must be considered when remarks are made. Sometimes I think we've got to be careful with some of the players we deal with, how far we push them with their mental health, Marshall said. I'm not making excuses for anything, but I can just see one day that the pressure of what we do, and we have seen that in the past, I'm not saying from media stuff, the pressure of our jobs in general can push people to the edge. More specifically on Mitchell, the 35-year-old Kiwi legend said, I suppose he's just a big-name player who gets more attention than others. I mean, I don't like to see it. You've got to surround yourself with good people who can probably help you get through that. Yeah, sort of interesting comments, but, there are other people out there, Paul, who will probably look at it this way. Man, you guys are actually living the dream, and it's only really for a short period of your time, and I think you've just got to look inside sometimes and realise what you actually have got.
You do sometimes, but it's interesting, isn't it? When I talk to my my sort of 11-year-old, a year is an absolute is an age. You can't even see that far ahead, kind of thing. Sometimes, so you got to say, whilst it might seem like a short time for some of the old guys, it seems like a lifetime for them. We got to say yes. Whilst we do have to be aware of the players' mental health, the sport or sports in general needs to do a much better job of training, mentoring these people as to what their responsibilities are
Yeah.
that come with those big paychecks.
Paul, I will jump in there and just basically say that, listen, those are only my thoughts, not the sports of New Zealand sport radio. And mental health is very much a real thing. And maybe I am a little bit of an old fuddy-duddy as well, so I should just throw that in.
No, I agree with your point, but I think what we're saying here is that actually the sports themselves generally do not prepare the players properly for this, and they need to take some responsibility as well. It's not just all on the media and the coverage these players get. Moving on this, Hugh makes a good point in the chat there that some cultures are better at dealing with the spotlight than others. The support structures around that might be true. Yes, you're quite right. Moving on then to football news, and the Premiership is still discussing different ways it can come back. We'll see what happens there. That's just an ongoing saga, isn't it? And whilst the EPL is discussing it, the Bundesliga are now ready to go. They will resume on the 16th of May. That is not this weekend, but the following weekend. We will have top flight football back. They are the second top flight sport back, with UFC going live this weekend, but more on that later. So on the opening weekend, we'll have Schalke versus Borussia Dortmund as one of the games. It's about 300 people it'll take to have a game behind closed doors. I think in New Zealand now we have bans on any gatherings over 100. Clearly that shows you an idea. We will do it level 2. That should give you an idea as to how many people it takes just to run a game. Never mind having the fans there as well. It's interesting that it's more than World Rugby's guidelines, which have been 175, I think it is, or 178. That World Rugby has come out and said you need for a closed door game. And that brings you up to speed with all of the football news. I'm going to hand you back to Stephen for our birthdays today. And he needs to take off.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Paul. And birthdays this morning. The other Retallick, a Fijian-born All Black winger, and finally a cricketing one-day specialist. And we actually head across the Tasman. Michael Bevan, born this day, the 8th of May 1970, is a former Australian cricketer. He is a left-handed batsman and a slow-arm wrist spinner. He has been credited for initiating the art of finishing matches. He was an Australian Cricket Academy Scholarship holder in 1989. Bevan, who turns 50 today, played 232 one-day internationals for Australia and was part of the 1999 and 2003 teams that won the Cricket World Cup. He was named as a batsman in Australia's greatest ever one-day team. No real surprise there. Moving on to the oval ball and back to New Zealand. Waisake Naholo, born this day, 8th of May 1991, in Sigatoga, is a Fijian-born New Zealand rugby union player. He previously played for the All Black Sevens and now plays on the wing, and now for Premiership team London Irish. Naholo made his Test debut for the All Blacks in 2015 and was a member of the 2015 Rugby World Cup winning squad. Naholo turns 29 today. And finally, Callum Retallick, born this day, the 8th of May 1985, is a former New Zealand rugby union player who represented Bay of Plenty in the Mitre 10 Cup. He is the cousin of All Black Brodie Retallick, who turns 35 today. That's Callum Retallick, who turns 35 today. He's also played 110 games for the Bay of Plenty Steamers, and he also turned out for the Chiefs, Highlanders, Blues, and Rebels in Super Rugby. And that's it for birthdays today.
Thank you very much, Stephen. And yes, rugby is where we're going to go to next, and there is plenty of rugby news. Yesterday, the New Zealand government announced that professional sport will be able to restart under level 2, and that particularly includes Super Rugby. And other players are looking forward towards this, says Mark Robinson, and we're looking at in New Zealand 10-week tournament where the 5 Super Rugby franchises play each other home and away. The decisions on the July series against Wales and Scotland by the All Blacks will be made in the next fortnight. But let's be honest, the only option on the card seems to be at the very well, either cancellation or at the very best a delay through till either late or early next year. whilst we have this new format for rugby this year, SANZAAR have said that this would be this is a one-off, and that actually the 14 man round robin tournaments that we're looking at for the next 2 years is going to go ahead. There is the possibility of, if we do have that Australasia bubble, that there may be some sort of final series against the Australian sides. They are looking at doing a similar format, but they have not produced it yet, or got their plans together yet, that would have the 4 Super Rugby franchises over there plus the Western Force doing a similar format to the to the New Zealand competition. Whilst we may go down to level 2 next week, that will still be several weeks away from rugby, as the Players Association have come out and said they need 3 to 4 weeks of training before we can return to actually playing games. So it's definitely not. We're not going to have return to play as quickly as a Bundesliga. For example, do not expect rugby to restart straight away as soon as we get to level 2. Heading back over to New Zealand, and Raelene Castle's replacement is the interim boss is going to be Rob Clark, and he says he has 3 areas he has to focus on. The first one is the finances. Obviously, with Wiggs being the board member who had been concentrating on the finances and who has now resigned, as we talked about yesterday, he obviously needs to take some time over the weekend to really drill down and figure out what the money situation is. Rugby Australia has said that their main sponsorship partners, Qantas, Vodafone, ASICS, Mitsubishi Estate, Jaguar, Land Rover, and others are still paying their sponsorship. It's worth, in 2018, was worth around 28 million, to give you an idea as to how much they are paying in. But still, the lack of rugby, and the lack of test matches in particular, will be a drain on the system. The second part is the competition, and Rugby Australia's high performance staff, Whitaker and Scott Johnson, have been working away on that and planning that out. As I've said before, it's going to look like that 5-team round robin format as well. But they're also looking at how they can get club competitions going in New South Wales and Queensland in particular. And then once he's got those sorted out, he can start looking at the future. So what will 2021 look like is basically the next stage. Now, as I say, SANZAAR has already said what it's going to look like, so we'll see how that pans out. Over in the UK, the RFU has been looking at how they could return to play with grassroots rugby. They've said quite clearly they're not going to be returning to play with 15-a-side full contact rugby, and that they'll be having to look at some sort of rugby activity, is how it's been termed, to return to play in a graduated form. So things like the removal of scrums, the removal of rucks and mauls, because that is where all the players, or where players get much closer to each other than in any other situation. There may be even the removal of tackling as well. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see how they look at bringing back the grassroots sport in that one. I say it's going to be interesting to see what kind of that looks like. I have seen comments on social media saying, hey, look, isn't this about this isn't going to be very good to watch. And remember, this is grassroots rugby. It's not about watching. It's about participating in there. I'm going to hand you back now to Stephen for our cricket update.
Well, Paul, that's really scary, those dark arts, the dark places in malls and breakdowns. There's going to have to be some sort of contact of sorts.
As a former flanker, yes, you're fully aware of all these dark arts at the bottom of the covered in mud at the bottom of pilot bodies.
Too true. Well, I've got the privilege of doing cricket news this morning, but there's not a lot of round. Just out of England, though, England's fast bowler Mark Wood says players would be willing to go into isolation in order for England matches to take place this summer. Plans to play in a biosecure environment could involve players staying together for a number of weeks and being subject to regular COVID-19 testing. Everybody in the squad, as long as the conditions are right, would be willing to come back and play some cricket, said Wood. I know it would be a long stint and it would be hard, but it would be good to get back out there. There will be no cricket in England and Wales until at least the 1st of July, which has meant the postponement of England's Test series against the West Indies. To reschedule those matches and host subsequent visits from Pakistan, Australia, Ireland, the England and Wales Cricket Board is exploring the possibilities of using biosecure venues. This could mean grounds like Old Trafford and Southampton, which have had a hotel on site where players, staff, media, and everyone else can stay, are required to be there on match days. England players have been briefed by the Director of Cricket, Ashley Giles, and the ECB's Chief Medical Officer, Dr. Nick Pearce, as to what the plans could mean for them. You sort of get used to being away on tour for long periods of time, said Wood, who has played 15 tests for England and was part of the team that won the 2019 World Cup. Don't remind us. It would be very hard, but as long as the environment is safe, it's basically just fallen over for the moment. But I think what he's pretty much saying, if they get all the protocols in place, everything should be fine. That's it in a very small form, elongated coverage of cricket this morning. Paul, back to you. Everybody have a great day and an even better weekend.
Thank you very much, Stephen. And don't forget, if you would like to see your club colours behind Stephen, particularly during the birthdays section, then do please send your jerseys in. He will return them as well, and also give you a little shout out about your club as well. So if you fancy seeing your club's jerseys behind Stephen during the birthdays, do send your jerseys in. Also, we also mentioned that during the rugby section that we'll be having professional sport back at level 2, and that includes netball as well. In a similar move to rugby, they would require 4 weeks of training before they could get up and running, and that has been agreed with the players and coaches that's what they would be needing. The format that they're looking at is most probably going to be the Super Sunday format, where they play all 3 games at one venue on a Sunday. Because obviously we have those 6 teams in New Zealand for the Steel, Mystics, Pulse, Stars, Magic, and Tactics. So it looks like they'll be flying up to probably Auckland to play those games in a Super Sunday format every single round. But the teams that aren't based in Auckland would be able to return home during the week for training. So that looks like it's good. That's the format's going to be. They say they're working with Rugby and Sky to make sure that there are no clashes, which should be fairly easy when you've got the whole weekend. And let's be honest, Rugby will only have 2 games a weekend. So I'm just guessing here, but I wouldn't be surprised if we saw our Friday nights, Saturday nights would be your rugby union games, and then you would have your netball on a Sunday. So if there is anybody out there who would like to be our netball correspondent and come on the morning sports briefing and give us an update as to how the netball has gone each week, then please do reach out. It would be much appreciated to have someone with some netball knowledge talking about it rather than me making up as I go along. There have been a few comments in social media saying, look, hey, if people can tackle, why can't I sit next to somebody in a restaurant, referring to the rugby and netball returning. The reason for that, folks, is contact tracing. The contact tracing for these 6 teams and the 5 teams of rugby, they were going to know exactly who has been where and when. So if there are any cases found, you'll be able to do contact tracing very quickly. Trying to do that try and keep that record of who has been in contact with who at thousands of restaurants over the New Zealand is a much, much more difficult or impossible prospect. And that's why sport can return, but why you must still keep your distancing in restaurants, folks. Moving on then, in Formula One, there is now a remote possibility that there'll be no racing in 2020, and teams are having to start to plan for that. Previously, we had heard that we were going to get those 2 races in Austria, followed by 2 races in England at Silverstone, but it looks like that there are chances that might not go ahead. That the goal is still to restart in Austria, as I say, at the first weekend in July. Finally, The first top-level sport to return is going to be the UFC, taking place this weekend. It is UFC 249. On the main card, we have two championship clashes, and I'm going to butcher the names here, so I'm very sorry about this, but Henry Cejudo will be taking on Dominic Cruz for the UFC Bantamweight Championship. And then what looks like to be the headline match is between Tony Ferguson and Justin Gaethje for the UFC Lightweight Championship. So that will all be on Sky Sports. So if you want to watch that, then head over to Sky Sports in New Zealand to figure out how you can watch that. I think it might be paid per view. That is your sports news, and you are now up to date with all of the important news. Thank you very much, Stephen, for joining me this morning. It has been a bumper round of news, especially in that rugby section. We are nearly there, folks. We can see UFC this weekend. We can see the Bundesliga in 2 weekends' time, and we can see rugby and netball in sort of 4 to 5 weeks, possibly. Stephen, are you looking forward to this sport all kicking off?
Oh, yeah, pretty much hanging out for it. And I know, talking to a lot of friends across a lot of various spectrums, they are absolutely hanging out. I mean, so I walk past a rugby park and a couple of sports fields every day, and just to see them abandoned is yeah, you just shake your head. It is what it is. But yeah, just counting down. But we'll keep bringing the sports news to everybody, Paul, and all the great news. Great show last night, swinging from the hip. Thoroughly enjoyed it, and that's building a lot of momentum. So can't wait to do the same thing with rugby as well.
Yeah, great show for cricket, swinging from the hip last night. So you can catch that on our Facebook page, New Zealand Sports Radio, or you can listen to it on the move via iHeartRadio, iTunes, Spotify, Acast. Just search for New Zealand Sports Radio. Also today at 2 p.m, I have got Tom Ashley, the Olympic gold medalist in windsurfing and also CEO of Canoe Racing. So dial in at 2 p.m for what is a fascinating interview.